the reason Black Panther is a better story is because I think it's doing the work of justice and of beauty and of virtue on multiple levels.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Ravencast. I'm really excited to be sharing with you this conversation that I had with Melvin Bray about the hit movie Black Panther and why this movie is a better story. But before I share it with you, I just wanted to let you know we had a couple of technical difficulties. Everything is smoothed over in the recording, so you shouldn't notice it at all. But by the time we got the technical difficulties figured out, we just wanted to jump right into the conversation. So I didn't have a chance to introduce Melvin, and so I wanted to do that now. So just take a minute to do that. Melvin is a storyteller, an author, a social entrepreneur. He is a guest speaker at many conferences, and he's the author of the wonderful book called Better, Waking Up to Who We Could Be. And if you are into becoming a better storyteller, highly recommend this book. If you are just into trying to make the world a better place, check out this book by Melvin Bray, Better. It's fantastic. Melvin is also a consultant, and his consulting company is called Co-Labyrinth. Very nice. Putting words together of collaborate and labyrinth. You can find it out at collabyrinthconsulting.com, where Melvin works with companies and organizations, churches of goodwill, in order to try to make things more equitable, more better. So check out Melvin's consulting there. You can also check out Melvin at better.melvinbray.com. And Melvin and I met at a conference, and I just went up to Melvin and asked him a couple of questions, and we ended up having this 2-hour conversation, and Melvin just blows my mind every time I talk with him. So I know that you will enjoy this conversation as we talk about Black Panther. So here you go.
It's just so good to see you, and I'm excited to talk with you about this movie, Black Panther. So
I am too, man. I'm excited, man. Let's jump in. Let's jump in for the few who are watching, and maybe we can grab some audience after the fact.
So we have a good audience, and if anybody wants to make a comment or a question, you can do that in the attendee chat. We would love to bring in your questions. Melvin, I already have way too many questions, and you sent me some questions this morning. So we could go on about this movie, Black Panther, and it's one of the things that I wanted to talk with you about because I saw it on Monday, and I read your article, which is connected to your book, Better.
Let's see. Here's my version.
Here's my version. Awesome.
Yes.
Cool. So you think that this movie Black Panther is a better story, and I want to talk with you about what you mean by that phrase and why you think Black Panther is a better story, because I read your article, and at the end of it you have a list of other articles that people could read if they're interested. Yes. And I went down this rabbit hole of all of these different interpretations of whether Black Panther is a helpful movie or a not helpful movie. And it seems like everybody has a different opinion on this movie. You have taught me so much about race in America, and I just wanted to bring you in to hear you talk about this movie and what this movie means to you and why you think it's a better story.
Oh, man, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for the invitation to talk about it. And hey, KJ, it's good to see you. KJ was one of the people who helped me get this book out the door, right? So we got shout out KJ Reynolds with Chalice Press. Yeah, let's go on to do that. And then, okay, so I have declared Black Panther the most better movie ever.
Yes, I love it.
And yes, that's right. I said most better, right? Trying to plug the book. But the reason that I think of Black Panther as being one of these better stories, even though in the book, the stories I'm talking about are faith stories, particularly like our religious faith stories, as well as our communal faith stories and our national faith stories. That's what the book focuses on. However, the reason Black Panther is a better story is because I think it's doing the work of justice and of beauty and of virtue on multiple levels, right?
Mhm.
On multiple levels, right? The movie operates on multiple levels. So, first and foremost, the movie is a love letter to Black people, to the African diaspora. And it is perhaps the most beautiful rendering thus far of people of the African diaspora, but not just African Americans, also folk in other spaces, who throughout this kind of the colonized world, who oftentimes, particularly on the continent, are belittled, even though everything that we know that we kind of define as a characteristic of civilization begins on the African continent. Everything, even the way we build our cities, begins on the African continent. Somehow, those who are from the motherland are belittled and demeaned. They're always shown to be, a white man can be lost in the woods or in the jungle and raised by apes and be in no formal education or anything. I'm talking about Tarzan now. And
Mhm.
and grow up to be king of the jungle, grow up to be able to communicate with animals and be able to communicate with indigenous people while the actual indigenous people are running around and can't ever figure out where they're going. Right? This is the story of Black people in the Western world. And Black Panther says, forget all that. There is beauty here. And there is beauty not only in the present, there is beauty in the past. And then there is also beauty in this Afro future that we can imagine that connects these past, present, and future all together. So I love letter to Black folks, and I could go on and on about that. The second thing that it does probably better than so many other movies is it speaks on the level to co-conspirators and offers a guide in solidarity. Says, forget what you've heard about this allyship. We're not doing too well with that, right? Learn solidarity, right? What does that mean? And it offers a visible guide. One of the things I know to be true is this: whiteness. And when I talk about whiteness, I'm talking about a concept. I'm not talking about a person, right? But whiteness left to its own devices will crap all over everything else, right? And so it was important that the movie not exist to the exclusion of the colonizing world, right? Of the supremacist, of those who are steeped culturally in the supremacist logic of Western society. The movie had to offer a place, a sense of this is how you enter into this beautiful story. And so we see that there. That's what the movie's doing, that work. And then the movie's just speaking to moviegoers in general, but not just as entertainment, as art. The purpose of art is to give us eyes to see that which we don't easily see, to give us tongues to taste and ears to hear that which we don't easily apprehend in our current world. That's what art does, and that's what this movie does on so many levels, from the technical mastery to just the storytelling and the plot, to the character development, to the use of symbolism and metaphor. And it's the most better movie ever.
I hear you, and I there are so many different ways that we could take this.
Yes.
Could you talk about Wakanda
Wow.
and I just see so much pride going around this handshake that happens in the movie
Wakanda
when they go
forever,
like
baby.
this and it's like this. I'm
And then
just like,
my wife just stands around sometimes just doing this, right? Like it takes me back to being young and the bankhead bounce coming out of Atlanta. Oh man.
yeah,
Good stuff.
yeah. One of the questions that I think is worth talking about is how can we you're talking about empire and white supremacy, and how is it possible to bring this Wakanda into places of empire?
Mm, mm. Such a beautiful question, right? Like, so Wakanda is a metaphor. And if we were going to try to find an existing metaphor that perhaps as a predecessor to this metaphor of Wakanda, because I don't mean to suggest that the metaphor of Wakanda is identical. To try to find a predecessor metaphor, I guess that metaphor would be this metaphor of beloved community that was popularized by Martin Luther King Jr., although it does not originate with him. So one of the reasons I make that connection is then it easily allows me to talk about the book Better, because the book Better is actually an attempt to show how story helps us to get to beloved community. How we choose to story our world is how we choose to is inevitably how we end up showing up in our world. And if we learn to tell more beautiful, more just, more virtue-filled stories, then we can create a more beautiful, more just, virtue-filled world, a better world. So I don't care what metaphor one chooses for how we relate well with one another, right? The point is there is an important end to this thing, right? Like we have to get to this point, and I'm going to do some product placement here. We have to get to this point where we do better, not just think, feel, and talk better, right? Which is where in the Western society we tend to get stuck, right? So when we're feeling bad about, oh, yet another person is innocent person of color has been shot and killed, murdered by agents of empire, right? By police officers and others who are trying to enforce a particular way of being in the world. When another unarmed person is shot and killed, we feel awful. We feel awful, and we talk about folk who because of the way they felt, they operated in a particular kind of way. Well, I'm not sure how they felt mattered. And I'm sure as heck don't care about, I mean, like, I don't think how I feel about them matters, right? Like, and how I feel about myself has nothing to do with how they feel about me, right? And we try to find better formulations in our talk, and we try to find better ways of thinking about the thing. But the thing where we get hung up is we never get to the do better. And so that's where Wakanda comes in, because Wakanda gives us an image of the do better. It first gives us an image of, it helps us see ourselves in terms of the debate in Wakanda about what is it, what are our obligations to the broader world. And then it says, and then it allows us to wrestle with it, right? And that it embodies that wrestling in the struggle between T'Challa and Eric Killmonger. And then it doesn't let T'Challa off the hook with this notion of, hey, you've overcome Killmonger, so now you get to disregard him. But it actually gives us a better cosmology, a different cosmology with which to hold this notion of those who pass. They move into the realm of the ancestors, and they become nourishment for our journey. And we are planted in the soil. You literally have the imagery of T'Challa being planted in the soil, buried in the soil, buried in the snow. And he grows in the soil of this experience with Killmonger, and he is changed by it. one of the ways that Africans in Mali are fighting back now against Monsanto. Because what Monsanto has done is wherever they can, they'll come in and they'll give their seed away, their genetically modified seed away to certain farmers. And the farmers will plant it. And then the next year, the seed will only yield if the farmers go back to Monsanto for the for whatever the genetic trigger is to make it grow, make crops grow again. Right. And what also happens during the course of that year is that when plants go to seed, the way they get replanted is the wind blows them. So it blows this genetically modified seed into soil belonging to folk who didn't want it. And what happens is Monsanto comes back and says, you must pay us for our seed being on your land, even though you didn't ask for it and you don't want it. And part of how they've been able to get out of the legal obligation, these Mali farmers have been able to get out of the legal obligation to pay Monsanto, is to say, when your seed touches my soil, it becomes genetically changed. It is not the same thing. And so too, T'Challa is not the same person at the end of the movie that he was at the beginning of the movie. So, I could do this all day.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I saw within that, Mary McKinney says Monsanto does that in the US as well. So sad.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I saw that, and I saw this kind of, I don't know if this is Christian imperialism or not, so let me know. But I saw this kind of death and resurrection thing happening. And so, like, he goes through this, like, he gets thrown down and he almost dies, and then he gets buried and he resurrects to this new life, so that at the end he's different. He's like, the seed imagery that you just pointed out is beautiful, is beautiful, because he's growing into a new thing. He's got these seeds planted in him. And I think that there are even hearts, like your heart gets like bigger and bigger. There's this great heart imagery. And one of the big, like the big debate that you see happening here is whether or not Wakanda should be isolationist, the tradition of the past, right? Or you've got Eric Killmonger, who says, no, we have to be involved in the larger world to help our people. And he ends up mirroring the empire. He tries to mirror the empire, like use the weapons of empire in order to make the world a better place. And then you've got Nakia. Oh my God, the women in this movie, man. Like,
I'm telling you, this movie is doing work. And it's doing so much work that could not be done otherwise. There have been people who have been saying these things, particularly in the last 6 years, since the death of Trayvon Martin. The truths that are embedded in this movie have been front and center, but many have refused to hear.
Yeah.
Many, and it didn't start 6 years ago, right? Like it started, many have refused to hear, but now in this movie, right, folk are hearing, and that's some powerful work. That's why we need to celebrate Ryan Coogler, right? So herein is one of the things that's happening, and you tell me if you're seeing this. People want to celebrate the movie without celebrating the genius behind the movie. Right, the writer and the writers and directors and cinematographers or cinematographer, the one who headed it up, and the design for, like, we need to celebrate the genius of Ryan Coogler, right, and not allow him to be somehow, because this is what Empire does, right, like, and what it has historically done specifically to Black people. And that is that it says, we want your art, we want your culture, we want your knowledge, we want the ways that you do civilization. We want to take those things, strip those things of their contextuality, rename those things, right? Like, no Imhotep here, right? We're going to give Hippocrates credit for medical science, right? Like, none of that. This is what we're going to do, and then despise you, resent you, dismiss you, overlook you, make sure that you aren't named, make sure that you aren't acknowledged. And if we can do it long enough, it doesn't take long. It takes a few years, at most a generation. If we can do it long enough, we'll come back the next generation and tell them that we created this stuff and they'll believe it. We'll tell you we created this stuff and you'll believe it. Right? So yeah. It's doing that work.
And it reminds me of that scene when Eric Killmonger goes into the museum, and his character is so amazing, Melvin.
Yeah.
Like it's one of the things that I loved, and also like that scared me so much about this movie is this character, because he's an incredibly good antagonist, an incredibly good villain. He goes into this He goes into this museum, and he's going to steal these artifacts, right? And this museum security comes up to him and says, "You can't do that. These are ours." And he's like, "You stole them from my ancestors."
How did you get them?
How did you get
You
them?
just took them, right?
Yeah. So, and I'm like, oh my God.
Even we even want to use the language of steal. The language he uses is, "I'm going to take this off your hands for you." Right? He says, "I'm going to take this off your hands. You can't do that. Why? How did you get it?"
Yeah.
Right. So yes.
Yeah. And so what do you make of this character? One of the questions that I want to ask you is, who do you identify more with? Because I'm seeing a lot of blogs out there who are saying that T'Challa is actually the bad guy in this. T'Challa is the king. He's the one who at first wants to be isolationist and then wants to use violence just for defense. A lot of people are saying that he's actually the bad guy in this. And then you've got Eric Killmonger, who I just like. One of the reasons that he scares me so much is because I'm like, his arguments are really enticing.
He is an extremely compelling antagonist. I mean, extremely compelling. In part because he's a fully developed antagonist. Like, we love the caricature of the good guy versus the bad guy, right? But Killmonger asks us to do a different kind of work. And the reason, I think, first, as a former English teacher, I think it's important to understand the difference between villains and antagonists, right? Like, so villains and bad guys, they're really props, right? The language we use in literature is they're foils, right? They exist in order for the protagonist to look better by comparison, right? So we know who the protagonist is in comparison to the villain, right? And so I can prove the validity of my tech. I can prove the prowess of my fighting skill. I can prove the preeminence of my argument, right, in comparison to this thing by belittling and creating really a straw man out of the villain. That's not the role of Eric Killmonger in this movie, right? The role of Eric Killmonger in this movie is to be an antagonist. In the same way, there are other antagonistic forces at work, at play in the movie, right? A villain may be, what's his name? A Claw, right? But Eric is an antagonist, and Eric is actually an answer to prayer. While visiting his father in the ancestral realm, T'Challa says, "I want to be a good king. Father, tell me, how can I be a good king?" And his father tells them, "You're a good man. It's hard for a good man to be king." And so there's this prayer that he will prove his worthiness to be king. He will prove that he has what it takes to be king. Well, how do you do that unless you are tried? And so that's who Eric Killmonger is. He's the embodiment, the personification of the trial. Right? And what he brings into the trial is not sufficient to be king. It's what he learns in the trial, coupled with what he brought into the trial, that makes him ready to be king. And so, yes, I think Eric Killmonger is extremely compelling. The problem is, though, by their fruits ye shall know them. And the problem is his fruit, right? He is hostile downright violent to women, particularly black women, who, if T'Challa had just listened to black women, like the subtitle of this movie should be "Listen to Black Women," right? But he is hostile to black women, and I don't care what it is. Anything that is hostile to black women is not a part of the better that we need to be seeking. The world made better, the world made beautiful, the world made just, right? It's just not, right? He's compelling. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why he's compelling. He's compelling because most of us know, and black people in particular, and people of color and folk who have been on the losing end of this colonizing and empire experiment that is Western culture, most of us know that you don't have to be Eric Killmonger to be treated like Eric Killmonger. And I'll make it pertinent to this moment. Here's an example. Think about how Black Lives Matter teens have been treated for saying we have the right to live, versus how Never Again teens coming out of Parkland, the high school in Parkland, Florida, are being treated. Now, yeah, the Never Again teens are being poo-pooed. Oh, you're just little babies. Go back, find your space again. We'll take care of you. But Black Lives Matter teens weren't treated so gently. They were publicly lynched, criticized, demonized, overlooked. It was like one of those little postcards that you can still find in the South, where folk are standing around smiling at the lynching, right? Now, yeah, they had some advocates. Jay-Z and Beyonce gave $1 million to some folk. But it didn't, in a far shorter period of time, demanding some of the same things, but actually making a less comprehensive demand, a less nuanced demand, a less structural demand. The Never Again teams have gotten public support from Oprah. Oprah put up $500,000 the other day. And that $500,000 was a matching gift to what George and Amal Clooney had already put up. Right? You got schools talking about, parents, grown folk talking about how can we support these teens, give them permission to be out of school that day, so on and so forth. Come on. I know folk who have started organizations and shed blood over the past 6 years. Blood, sweat, tears, lost comrades, not once, not twice, not 3 times, who still can't get that same respect.
Yeah.
And so that's being treated like Eric Killmonger, even though you're making a far more nuanced, more beautiful than Eric Killmonger. And so if you're going to be treated like Eric Killmonger, how long are you supposed to take that? That's what makes Eric compelling.
Yeah. One of the statements about Eric in the movie that relates to this, one of the other themes of the movie is truth.
Yeah.
How do we get at the truth? And T'Challa's father, T'Chaka, says that Eric Killmonger, when he was young and he left him behind, he was the truth I chose to omit.
Yes. Woo, that was a line.
Right?
That was a line. It was the truth I chose to admit.
Yeah. And there's another line in there that says that T'Challa says that he is a monster of our own making.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And this, I don't know about monster language and whatnot, but it's this search.
I think it's valid. Right?
Yeah,
like here's the thing, right? Like, this notion, I think we have to be careful, and I get the whole idea of, listen, we cannot dehumanize Black people, particularly not Black men, right? Because society has done this thing. Black men, for better or for worse, are as much a structural reality as they a manifestation as we are individuals, right? Like, and so I get that argument that we must always be careful. But one of the things that Coogler does a really good job at is helping us understand that what is monstrous about Killmonger is how he was shaped and cultivated over time. You know, one of the contributions of Agent Ross, the CIA agent, is to say that is what the CIA taught him. That is what Empire taught him to do. Destabilize governments, use that vacuum, step in, unify those who are feeling vengeful in your enterprise, and burn the remembrance of everything else down. Right? So those outcomes are indeed monstrous. And since Killmonger is less a person in this movie, right? Like, we want to relate to him as a person, and more one of two responses to the work of colonization by the Western world on Africans, right? Like, since he's the personification of a response, right? Then we must name what is not just what is unsavory, what is destructive and deadly in that response, right? So I get that. I get the statement. I get both the statement and why it needed to be made, and it does need to. Listen, you shoot your girlfriend, you choke out a woman, you slit a woman's throat, and that's just the beginning of your interaction across gender. Yeah, that's monstrous.
That's monstrous. Yeah.
That's monstrous.
And the movie speaks the truth to that, and it speaks the truth to white supremacy, as you've been talking about, colonization. There's that line where one of the women says, "You colonizer."
Don't sneak up on me, colonizer.
I'm like, okay, so I'm watching this and I'm like, oh my God, that's me. What do I do? Right? And you've been talking about the CIA agent and how he's, I forget the term that you used. He's
the embodiment or the personification of solidarity,
allyship, as opposed to allyship. And I would love to hear you talk more about that distinction, because I'm watching this movie and I'm like, what do we do with this? Like, I'm seeing Black people talk about it, and here's the problem that I'm having, Melvin. Your article pointed me to this. I saw it on YouTube. Also, I've got white people who are shitting on this movie. I've got white people who are pissing, as you say, on Black joy.
Yes.
And I'm watching this movie and I'm like, oh my God, this is telling the truth, and people aren't wanting to hear the truth. You know, I work with Renee Girard stuff, and I'm seeing this in Renee Girard Facebook pages. No, it's not white supremacy. You stop scapegoating white supremacy, and I just want to call bullshit on them. Because you got to see the truth, and this movie is pointing to the truth of colonization and white supremacy, and how we can be more than allies, how we can stand in solidarity.
The movie scapegoats anything, right? Like, so to take a momentary pause on the mimetic theory part of this thing, right? If it scapegoats anything, it scapegoats Killmonger.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so those who want to center themselves by saying, oh, this movie is scapegoating white supremacy, are reading themselves as more significant to this movie than they are, right? If there's a scapegoat, it's Eric Killmonger. And we can have a good old conversation about how the movie does that work, right? And why the movie does that work and where that work is embedded in the history of the United States and embedded in the history of cinema and embedded in the history of literature, right? All of this kind of thing, right? Like we can do that, right? But this movie acknowledges the reality and the existence of supremacy, but it does not in any way center it. In fact, it turns that shit on its head and actually says, while you're figuring out your place in this thing, here's some things you need to know. And they're embodied in this character of Ross, right? Like, so the reason I say Ross is a co-conspirator, and I got that from somebody else. I need to figure out where I read that and give it, right? The reason Ross becomes a co-conspirator as opposed to how he shows up in the movie initially, which is a colonist, right? Like who thinks everything is about him. I mean, everything is about him, and he thinks he gets to tell T'Challa how this thing is going to go down. So you don't get to be here, and then oh, you told me you're going to be here. Like this stuff never happens in the movies, right? Like we black people, we don't get to say slow your roll, old buddy, right? And if we do, we are it's as in a villainizing light, right? Like you are somehow harming me by doing it. Right. So, and then he tells T'Challa, oh, well, if you're going to be here, then you need to do what I say do. And then he gets his butt beat. T'Challa saves him, all this other stuff. But he loses the guy they came to get and loses the vibranium. T'Challa and Okoye and Nakia. And by the way, that's the person I identify with most, Nakia. Right. Yeah. These three go chase the villain down, right? Grab the villain, try to hold the villain in account. And here comes the CIA agent. Thanks for doing all that work for me. I appreciate that labor. Let me show you how we do it in Supremacy land. We're going to take credit for your labor. Let me take him, and now you'll be lucky if I let you talk to him. For real? And then you got this insecure facility that gets hacked. The enemy escapes, right? And this guy is still talking junk, but he does something in a moment of humanity where he actually risks something. And this is where he turns, right? So what makes it an act of solidarity and not allyship is trying to understand and trying to be a part, and often ending up centering yourself in the project, right? But it doesn't involve any real risk. You don't have to give up anything. You don't have to lose anything. You don't. And the stuff we do name as being given up or being is stuff that really doesn't matter. It may matter to you, right? Like your comfort may matter to someone, but it's not a real risk. This is life, and as a result, right? Then he starts on a journey, and he doesn't get it right. I'm still not convinced he deserved to be brought into the inner sanctum of Wakanda, right? Like, sure, he could have taken care of him out on the lagoon where she took care of Bucky, right? Right, but it does show. It's because of that risk that he enters into solidarity. And that is the thing that gets acknowledged and honored. And so that's why I think that is important to hold up as if we're going to do this work of better world together, then you have to be willing to risk what is dear. Not just get in where you can fit in, where you can reorient the thing back to the thing that matters, the stuff that matters to you.
That's such a powerful statement and moment in the movie. He risks his whole life for this, and but
we must acknowledge it's reflex.
Yeah,
you know, he's not sitting there saying, I respect these people now. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
it's a human. He made a human reflex, but and we must recognize it's the beginning and not the end of his journey.
yeah. We've got a couple of statements here, comments here. Mary McKinney says, a friend of ours, Tony Bartlett, said that either The Matrix or Terminator was written by an African American woman, and then it was stolen from her.
It was the Matrix.
Was The Matrix, yeah.
Yeah.
So
It was stolen
Suzanne's,
by the what? Wachowski brothers? Yeah.
yeah,
The original piece was had lion in the title. I wish I could remember more, but you may be able to track down the specifics if you tie in Matrix. You'll probably get it because she sued them.
oh, she did, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Suzanne makes a point.
Oh, by the way, what you
Yes.
call it is the same. The Help
Oh,
is
really?
the story, like almost verbatim, of the black domestic worker who raised the brother of the author. And her name is actually Abilene. So they didn't even bother to change the name. They changed the spelling. And she sued, and the courts had a nerve to, like, the story of her son dying and all that comes from this woman's life. Like, there was no part of that the author bothered to even try to cover her tracks in makeup, right? And I talk about this in the book. And she still couldn't win her court case.
But white supremacy doesn't exist.
White supremacy doesn't exist.
No. Suzanne writes that the movie begins with enemy brothers killing a brother. And you see the connection between the cousins come through
Yes.
in biblical imagery of brothers against brothers.
Yes.
She's wondering if you want to relate those two together. Clearly, Cain and Abel, and Jacob and Esau,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
T'Challa and T'Chaka, and
Well,
yeah.
one of the things, so we could easily go into the parallels of just kind of the imagery itself, right? Like that's there, right? Brother against brother. And that's the straightforward thing. I think one of the things to celebrate about it, though, is that part of telling a better story is taking the time to understand the archetypes in which most of us, and part of the brilliance of what Ryan Coogler is doing, is rooting this story of better in those archetypes that already have resonance within the human psyche and the heart, so that it can get to that deeper part quicker, right? And so by starting with that archetype, that archetypal bad blood between brothers, right? And just like in the movie of Black Panther, in the original story in the Hebrew Bible of Cain and Abel, what we see is less two people having this conflict, as opposed to two ways of being in the world. One of shepherd and people who are nomadic, right, in nature, versus one of farmer and people who settle in a space and cultivate. And if we know anything, we know that part of the challenge a lot of us in our ignorance equate shepherding and farming together in the Western world, but they actually are two different interests. And one of the problems is they both compete for the same resources, right? They both compete for the same resources. And so inevitably there is conflict. They start in two different places, competing for the same resources. Eventually there will be conflict. Water, land, oh my God, yes, there's going to be conflict. And then we see the working out. What are the different responses that they give? And we love to villainize the real enemy in the Cain and Abel story is the attitude of Abel and the attitude of Abel's parents. Why can't you just be like Abel? Right? It's just that the parents won, and got to tell the story. So they told a story that showed them in the positive light. But there's this interesting, I mean, just really interesting commentary that the Bible makes on itself at the end of the Cain and Abel story, where the Bible says this is about the time when humans start to claim God for themselves. And so you have this all of a sudden now the story you've just heard is framed in a way of people are making claims on who God is. And the God character in the story is constantly trying to tell Cain, listen, man, if you do good, won't good come to you? So why are you caught up in what it is that they're doing? Right? If you get caught up into that, then sin lies at the door. Right? And so, I mean, it's a deep story, right? And Kugler is tapping into those archetypes. And if any of that reading of the story of Cain and Abel seems unfamiliar to you, I have some audio that's available either at better.melvinbray.com or it's available at findourselves.blogspot.org or .com. And audio on the telling of the Abel and Cain saga. To that point, let me end with this part, and that is, I think the real enemy in the black is neither Claw nor Eric Killmonger, even though they play their part. The real enemy is that what T'Challa thinks he already knows. And the story is about his evolution beyond what he already knows.
Yeah, I like it. Mary, I will put up links to Melvin, your audio online in the show notes, so I'll do that. So the real enemy is what? Say more about that. The real enemy is
what T'Challa thinks he already knows, right? Like, and so in this moment, we enter into this moment in time, this Black Lives Matter moment, this Me Too moment, time's up, never again. We enter into these moments in time with what we have as the knowledge of the story. And we make dangerous comparisons that try to simplify our understanding of the story and actually just thwart it, frustrate it, confuse it to death, right? Like, so we try to make connections like, T'Challa is like Martin Luther King Jr. and Killmonger is like Malcolm X, which is one of the most ignorant, perverse comparisons that could ever be made. It's based on a caricature of Malcolm X that was created by the supremacist logics that killed both men, the supremacist forces that killed both men, right? This caricature, Malcolm X never calls for the taking up of arms. Malcolm X calls for a radical Black willingness to love so deeply that you're willing to value your own life and defend it if necessary. The quote we hear from, the misquote we hear from Malcolm X all the time is this business of by any means necessary. But most of us don't know what that's attached to. That's attached to a longer statement where he's actually making to the world, to the UN, where he's saying, we have the right to be treated as, and forgive me for not quoting it exactly. We have the right to be treated as human. Black people have the right to be treated as human beings, respected as human beings, given the rights of human beings, right? Because of course, in Western society, everything is based on rights. As if you don't agree that I have the right, then somehow I don't. Right. Given the rights of a human being, and we are committed to bringing these things into existence by any means necessary. Now, you tell me what's wrong with that.
Nothing. I'm going to say nothing's wrong with that. What's wrong with that is, as you point out in your book, Better, the way that white supremacists take it out of context. White
Sure.
supremacy takes it out of context and takes MLK out of context too. Since MLK's death, white people have domesticated MLK to be this.
That's why they killed him.
Yeah,
Listen, man, you can't
make sure that you say
who's
nonviolent.
always out there trying subverting your messaging around him. So we got to kill you first.
Yeah. Yep. So just make sure that you stay nonviolent, like MLK. So we use MLK as like this weapon against Black people to make sure.
Never mind how violent we are to you, right? Like, nonviolence is only about your response. It's not about who we choose to be and how we choose to show up in the world.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's even what's wrong with this conversation around, right? Like, so we talk about the danger of these dualisms, right? That's what's been wrong about this conversation around debate, so-called debate around guns, right? Because the way that supremacist logic frames it, and I use the word supremacy intentionally, I simply mean this notion, this philosophical notion that is never interrogated and never challenged, really, that we are going to be on top. We're going to be on top. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what it is, we, and me and the people who identify with me are going to be on top. That supremacist logic. So the way that supremacist logic frames the debate of guns is Second Amendment versus gun control. And they're basically two power factions trying to determine who's going to be on top. The old African proverb that says, when elephants fight, the grass loses. And so neither, come on, Wakanda, right? So neither of those two framings takes into account the most valuable part of the equation, which is a person's right to live. And see what those two debate over Second Amendment and gun control, what they overlook is that the issue has never been about white people having guns or losing guns. That has never, ever happened in U.S. history. The government has never, ever at any given time come for white people's guns, ever. I can point to the points in history where they took Black people's guns and where they took Native American people's guns, but the United States government has never, ever, ever, not even threatened to come for any people's guns except maybe somebody who was shooting them at someone they didn't want them to shoot them at, right? And that's about criminality more than anything else. But what that opposition and that false dilemma creates is it helps us. It's sleight of hand. It's misdirection, which keeps us from looking at the real issue. The real issue is who gets to make money, on whom, for what, where, when, and how long. The gun debate is about money. It's always been about money. And here's how you know it's about money. We've been talking about all these guns in the inner city forever. All my life, talking about guns in the inner city. All of those guns are legal. Most of them. And we know they're legal because if gun manufacturers, if weapon manufacturers were losing product by the crate load, there'd be more gun control legislation in the world than a little bit. This is about money. And it's about a good many of the negotiated treaties in the world between the United States and other people is a negotiation around the right to provide arms. Gun manufacturers don't exist on the continent of Africa. That I know of. I could be wrong about that. Right? But typically the bulk of gun manufacturing isn't happening abroad. It's happening right here.
Yeah.
Right? So for us to make for certain people to make money in this country off of at another person's expense. And what these children have been saying, what the Black Lives Matter children have been saying, and now what the Never Again children are saying, and listen, I got love for both. But what they are saying is our lives matter more than your money. And that's the issue.
That's it. Yep. I want to you end your article with a little reflection on taking your daughter to see Black Panther. And I thought it was just such a beautiful ending. And can you just talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I actually took all three of my children. My wife and I, we went to the first showing opening night. Right.
Yeah.
We're going to see it. And we had some friends who had actually seen the movie in advance and it had assured us that there was more good in it than there was questionable that would make it appropriate for children, particularly children our age. My oldest is 15, which I had no issue with her going at all. And then my youngest is 10. He is 10. However, we went first, and then the next day we went back, and it was great because we had some friends who own a little business in the neighborhood, and they put up this sign called Happy Wakanda, and it was like, yes, I'm going to be in this movie with my children. And so I'm sitting there, and our 12-year-old chooses to sit closest to me. So my wife and I bookend them in the row, and my 12-year-old daughter, Kari, she sits closest to me, and we watch the movie. And I'm having a moment for the second time. And I had asked my wife the night before. She's more introspective than I am. So I, let me hear what you think about the movie. I asked her what she thought, what part, and she didn't have much to say. And I said, so what part did you like the most? And she said, all of it. And so I'm sitting next to my daughter, who's the spitting image of her mother, right? Like just in almost every way. And afterwards, I lean over. The credits are playing, and we're waiting for the credit scenes. And I lean over and I say, "So, what did you think about the movie?" And she pauses for a long time. Long time. I'm just thinking she's not going to answer. And finally, she kind of sidles up confidentially to me and says, what are you supposed to do after that?
Yeah.
Like, what am I supposed to do with the rest of my day? She said, can we just stay and watch it again? Oh my God. And that right there, if I didn't know before then, I knew then that this movie and better stories actually matter. And that Ryan had succeeded in doing the work in the book. I say, if we don't dare to tell a more beautiful, more just, more virtue-filled story, then our children have no reason to care about this thing called faith that matters to us, right? And I think this business of telling more beautiful stories is the work of this generation, because I know that if we can imagine the more beautiful, then we can live into it. But if we won't even if we're gonna bitch and shit on and piss all over people, every attempt at telling a better story, then we'll never get to anything more than what we have right now.
Yes, Melvin, thank you for telling the better story. Thank you for writing the book. And
thank you so much.
Thank you for having this conversation with me.
And then also check out A Wrinkle in Time, because this I believe in Ava DuVernay.
Yeah. Definitely check that one out. Melvin, I didn't get to even introduce you at the beginning, so I'm just going to tell people a little bit about you. Melvin is a storyteller, an amazing human being, as you have seen here. He's got the book Better. Go check it out. It's wonderful. Melvin is also you are also a consultant.
Yeah.
And if you want to check out Melvin's consulting work, Melvin, where can they find you online?
You can find it. It's a tricky name, but it's a meaningful name. It's Collabyrinth, right? So combination of collaborate and labyrinth, Collabyrinth, CORINTH, consulting.com. And we work with communities of goodwill to actually create the structures and systems, the policies and practices that create better, that create equity, diversity, and inclusion. So if you are a part of any community of goodwill, whether it be an organization or a church or an NGO or just a group of folk who are tired, who have said enough already about some inequitable outcome that's happening in society, I'd love to talk with you.
Awesome. Thank you. And people can keep up with you at better.melvinbray.com.
Yes. And I have other websites that come up, but those are the two primary right now. And this book business takes over your life. Yeah. So I haven't posted to melvinbray.com in forever.
Yeah. And people can read your article that you wrote on Black Panther on Medium.
It's on Medium. It's on the website Medium, medium.com. And the title is Black Panther, critique it if you want, but be smart about it, or something like that, right?
Just be smart, people. One way you can be smarter is to read more Melvin Bray. So
yeah, that's one way, I guess. But let me tell you, listen to Black women. This is the ultimate truth here.
Yes, listen to Black women. I love it. Melvin, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me today. Good talking with you, Adam. Take care.
Good talking with you too. Take care.